Hello, I'm Burr Tillstrom, and I'm doing something that puppeteers do regularly. I'm repairing one of my puppets. But this is a little bit different than just an ordinary puppet because the little guy I'm working on is the original Kukla. And it's hard for me to believe as I'm kind of mending some of these very, very bad tears that the original stitches are nearly 50 years old. There he is, Kukla number 1. I remember WPA, the Federal Theater Project, the marionette or puppet project in Chicago with great affection and warmth. I was just out of high school, had a scholarship at the University of Chicago. I'd already started my puppet career with marionettes in high school, even in junior high school. Puppetry was beginning to grow in the early 30s and beginning to be seen. And in 1936, the first American Puppetry Festival was organized by a great man in Detroit, Paul McFarland, at the Detroit Institute of Arts, which, by the way, has still one of the great collections of puppetry in the world. And it was at that conference in Detroit, that Puppetry Festival, that I met Tony Sarg, the Tatterman Marionettes from Cleveland, Rufus Rose, Martin Stevens, people from all over the country who brought their puppets and gave a show, and it was inspirational. And for the first time, we saw puppets other than marionettes, hand puppets. I made Kukla really to give to Bessie Ficklin's grandson, who was a puppeteer, and it really showed me a lot about how to make hand puppets. And I made him, I started him out of the rag bag, this poor old red cotton, and this funny little, whatever that is, like a little yarn, rough, and the fur. And of course, he started out to be a clown. Kukla really is a clown. That's the pattern, the red cheeks and the red nose and the little funny mouth and those eyebrows. That's very much clown makeup. And I made him to give away to my friend in New Orleans. And when I finished him, I put him in the box to send him, and I showed him to my mother, and I said, I'm having a hard time, because I really like this little puppet. He's my first hand puppet, and I really like him. But I feel honor bound, duty bound to send him to my friend in gratitude. And she said, well, she said, you know, I don't want to tell you what to do, but he is a wonderful little puppet. This is my mother speaking. And I would, why don't you make another one for your friend in New Orleans and keep this first hand puppet? It was the best advice I ever got, because that's what I did. And he later became Kukla, which you all probably know is a Russian name for doll, also means the same in Greek. It's a kind of term of endearment. I love WPA. It was I can never be grateful enough for the experience. It was a college education in itself, and needless to say, I got more from that than at the University of Chicago. I'm sorry to say that, but I did. And I did not renew my scholarship, half scholarship. I finished that first term and decided I'd rather, as Ollie says, go to the School of Hard Knocks. And I went off trouping with the puppeteers and with the Federal Theater. Couldn't have been more fun. I was lost when it ended, but good things do seem to have to, and we have to move on, and I moved on. So when I didn't have the WPA troupe, why, Kukla formed his own troupe, and it was from that moment on that the Kuklapolitan Theater grew. Kukla was a mentor in a way. He spoke, people always talked to him. So he's been an alter ego and a kind of voice for me. I remember it so well. It was in 1939 I had just turned down the possibility of a long and wonderful trip on the Normandy, that wonderful ship, beautiful ship that a friend of mine was booked on, a puppeteer who had a nightclub act, and he wanted an assistant, and he was going to Paris, and then of all places Berlin. This was just before World War II started, and he needed an assistant, and he offered me the job. Not only would I have been paid, but I would have had this glorious experience of traveling. But I was reticent because I loved my little Kuklapolitans, my Kukla. And I had a feeling that my career, the future of my career rested in my own creativity, not assisting someone else's creativity. Not that that isn't great experience, but I had passed that experience. I had already served my apprenticeship. So I turned it down reluctantly. Well, every fiber of my romantic being wanted to go on that steamship and see Paris and see Berlin, see Europe that way. On the day I turned it down, I seemed kind of dreamy, and I walked through, a little sad and wondering, doubtful. I walked through Marshall Fields, where I had previously done children's theater in their famous fourth floor children's section, toys and clothing and so on. And on that floor was also the radio record division, and there, set up in front of my eyes, was this remarkable, magical thing called television. There were perhaps 10 sets set around the floor in the section of the store where the records were sold. Radio, remember, radio and records were the big thing then. And then there was a little kind of cubicle set up with a camera, a small studio, and they were televising people and things from that studio. Well, I thought, you know, these are the days of Tom Swift. This is science fiction come true. So I pushed my way through the crowds back to find out who was running this. I talked to the buyer of the section, who was a friend of mine from my children's theater days there, and they introduced me to the head of the organization. He said, "Sure, kid. What do you got?" I said, "Well, I have some puppets I'd love to do." He said, "Sure, bring them down, kid. We'll put them on for you." So I brought Kukla and Ollie down. It seems to me I did something, I turned a card table on the side and got down, hunched way down, and brought Kukla and Ollie and did a little show. And they invited me to come back and come back and come back, and I went every day. Of course, no money. But who wanted money when magic was here? And I knew then and there that that's what I wanted to do. There was no question. All thoughts of the Normandy and of Europe, of Paris, and Berlin went right out the window. I had no regrets, and I realized that I had somehow been led into the right decision. From that moment, working with the RCA Victor touring Jeep show. I don't know why it was called a Jeep show. Perhaps they transported it in Jeeps. I don't know. I don't remember. But it was called a Jeep show, closed circuit show that went from store to store, place to place to demonstrate television, the new wonder of the world, RCA Victor television. Later, when television went commercial, that is, when they got a commercial license, after my experimental work was done, they invited me, RCA Victor invited me, to do a daily show, at that time, an hour a day.
All hail television! All hail! All hail! A glorious year! All hail! Hours of fun! To see as well as to hear ya! Though the critics critics said it wasn't here to stay. To begin, it would cost more than we could pay. But the pioneers have pioneered the way. So lift your voices to say, all hail television, goodbye to gloom and sorrow. All hail television, the eyes of tomorrow. And remember, in television,
it's RCA Victor.
Hello, this is Burr Tillstrom again. As my good friend Ollie might say, thanks very much.
RCA Victor, world leader in radio, first in recorded music, first in television. Kukla, Fran, and Ollie comes to you from Chicago.
We were sitting on the 20th Century one day, coming into New York for our first big personal appearance after we'd gone on the network. Oh, what a thrill it was, and sitting in the marvelous dining car, going along the Hudson in the morning with it. Great expectations. And Fran and I were having breakfast. What an adventure it was. And she said, you know, I think I saw Fletcher coming in for breakfast early, and he had carrot juice. And I said, well, have you seen Madame Okapoo's Girl and Cracker? She said, well, they ate early because it takes Madame Okapoo so long to pack her hat boxes and things, and so on. And I said, what about Beulah? She said, oh, Beulah's up with the engineer riding in the cab of the engine, and so on. And she really, you know, we really saw this, and we had the best time in the world imagining them taking this trip with us and what they would be doing. There was never a scrap of script.
hello there, hello. Oh, doggone, so slippery. Hello.
The original series of Kukla, Fran, and Ollie began in 1947, October 13th, my birthday, incidentally, and the best birthday present I ever had. Music was possibly the only thing ever written down and the only thing that I really used as a script.
Are we all ready, please? Everyone on the stage, please.
Is it on all right?
Yes, grand.
Okay.
Oh, you hop a little on your little left shoe. You hop a little on your right one, too. You kick a button like the Scotch kids do. It's the hop, hop, Scotch polka. Oh, you hop a little on your little left shoe. You hop a little on your right one, too. You don't mind bouncing like a kangaroo. It's the hop, hop, Scotch polka. It's in and out among the maple trees. It's up and...
We actually went on the air when and this was for a coast-to-coast network. We went on the air not knowing what we were going to do. There were times when I'd get right up to 6 o'clock and I'd say, Fran, I don't know what to do. Quarter, I don't like this idea. I'm not happy with it. What do we do? Let me tell you, in that 5 seconds just before we were deadline, it was silent prayer. And Ollie come up, well, hello, Kukla. You know, what's on the docket today? What are we going to do? Are we going to do the Gilbert and Sullivan number, or are we going to do, am I going to, so on and so on. And Kukla says, I don't have the remotest idea of what we're going to do. And Ollie would have the grandest ideas about bringing in dancing girls. The Rockettes, get me the telephone. I'm going to call Radio City. We'll get the Rockettes in here. We'll fly them in. We'll get Beulah Witch to get them on the broomstick. They'll be here in 15 minutes. We'll have a great number," and so on. Oh, and Madame Ogilvus might say, "Well, my dear, it's time. I think this is a very good time to have a concert. I just happen to have a little number," and so on. Maybe she'd do it. And, or Beulah would come up and say,
"Would like me to do a little magic, honey? I'll do a little magic for you. Let me see now. What do we do? Should we do an invisible spell?"
well, of course, we ended up doing, with everybody with these crazy ideas, doing a show about not doing a show. And invariably, of course, the show was marvelous. It would end up being great fun. The surprise, how it would surprise me. Because I'd go in thinking I'd never ever do another show again. It was 10 years of pure, unadulterated, exhausting, organized confusion.
Yeah, I had a little bit of I saved some junk from his place for years.
He was in retirement, really, in 1973, but not really. He didn't want to retire. He hated the idea of not continuing.
And I had a little hand grinder that he fancied himself as a environmentalist, that he would grind by hand the compost, and it was just a ridiculous little thing. And I kept that for years. It's kind of a bent artifact.
And we had gone out to dinner, and it was out at the Old Point West. We were driving back, and Burr was in the back seat, and I forget who it was, but one of us said, how was dinner? And the next thing we heard was Beulah Witch going, "Oh my God, it was fabulous. I love the salmon. That was the best thing on the whole thing, was the salmon." And it was so wonderful to me, because I had always heard that each of those characters were him.
And I don't know how I got the job, but I got the job working on Burr's barn, pardon me. It was kind of, ramshackle living quarters, summer living quarters.
There was just some kind of, he wasn't childlike, but he just had a fun way about him. If he could see, a way to get people to laugh or talk, he just was very good at it. But I'll never forget his love of his dogs.
Otherwise, I worked on his barn a little bit, and the wind would just kind of blow through it. I caulked all the windows and painted it red or something, built a stairway. Otherwise, I did, there were a lot of people say, "Hey, can you introduce me to Burr?" And I probably offended people by just kind of saying, "No, I'm not going to do that," because he's a very private person. Him and his dog, and this, not that I was a close friend to him, but, I worked on his place.
It was one of the few times he himself came out from the proscenium arch of a puppetry stage, sat in a single stool by himself with Kukla just on his hand like this, a pin spot onto Kukla, and very quietly and softly sang the song "The Lamb." And it was just, you could hear a pin drop in the theater. It would just make you cry. It was such a touching and poignant performance. And that's where I really said, this guy's an amazing artist,
Little lamb, my birthday is here at last. Little lamb, a birthday goes by so fast. Little bear, you sit on my right there.
Little hen, what game shall we play and when?
So now that I've kind of convoluted my
That's all right. It's all going to come together in editing. Just
yeah,
wait.
that's right. I'm a non-linear guy.
If somebody said, you know, write your early memoir, there'd be a section on Kukla, Fran, and Ollie. I realized that. Not Ed Sullivan, not any of it. It would be Kukla, Fran, and Ollie.
So, very special man. Very special man.
He was just a fun person to be around. Saugatuck has so many talented people over the years that it's just a great place to live in.
All right, I'm going to back you up just a little bit and have you introduce yourself with your name.
Okay. My name is...
Your name and how you knew him. And I'll not step on your line. Go ahead.
Okay, we'll do that. My name is Alan, Alan Weiner, W-E-E-N-E-R, commonly Al Weiner. From around here it's mispronounced, but I'm comfortable with that. I appreciate you putting this together.
Here we are, back with you again. Yes, by gum.
And yes, by golly.
Kukla, Fran. And dear old Ollie.
Here we are again.
Here we are again. Here we are again.
Here we are again.
Here we are again. Here we are again. Kukla. Oli. Hi, Fran. Hi, Fran. Kukla, Fran, and Oli. Very happy are we. I am delighted when you're near me. Next to myself, I love you dearly. Kukla, Fran, and Oli. Buddies are we.
Two is company, three is a crowd.
And we're the happiest,
Proudest, merriest.
loudest crowd you ever did see. Kukla, Fran, and Oli. Kukla, Fran, and Oli.
Kukla, Fran, and Oli.
Kukla. Oli.
Fran.
Hi, Fran.
Fran.
Hi, Fran.